Hello, my name is Michael Carnegie. I apologize for not being able to come today as I had a family memorial. I still am very appreciative of being able to show you guys this video of my work. Uh, I want to give a big shout out to my mentor, Maha Ali. Without her, none of this would have been possible. She has been probably the best mentor I could have asked for. And my PI, Dr. Huang, he has also done a tremendous amount for me, and I'm very appreciative. But looking at the project that I was able to do this summer was the creation of a manganese nitroxylene complex and using it against bacteria to see its activity as an antibacterial agent. So the first thing we did was the synthesis of this complex. So our ligand is nitroxylene and it acts in a bidentate fashion, as you can see on the rightmost picture of the complex. And nitroxylene is a known antibacterial agent used a lot in Europe, mainly Germany. And so we really were thinking, how could we maybe enhance this nitroxylene? How could we use it or like increase its activity against bacteria to make it an better overall drug? And so by following this scheme, we're able to make the tris complex, which is anionic, potentially helping the lipophilicity as well. So here's our confirmed structure. It is a dimer with potassium just as a spectator ion. And that's important to note because the manganese that is in the purplish ion there in the top middle of the picture is actually a coordination number of 6, additionally helping with the lipophilicity. Why does that even matter? So the real reason like this matters and lipophilicity matters so that it can potentially penetrate the cells of the bacteria cells better to release the drug and kind of try to stop the bacteria from growing, inhibiting it, or potentially killing it. But why even care about bacteria in general? Why make this drug? Why try to enhance nitroxylene on its own when it already is a known active antibacterial agent? Well, there's a thing called AMR, which is the antimicrobial resistance, and that's how bacteria they grow resistant to drugs over time. And so if we stop creating more antibacterial agents like this, or potentially like this, we won't have a way to fight bacteria, which is a pretty scary thought, to get a bacterial infection that, we may normally brush off, but in the future, we may not be able to brush it off and may have severe consequences. So the first thing we want to look at was some preliminary testing called MIC. MIC is minimum inhibitory concentration values. So what does this even mean? The MIC is the minimum amount of our drug or a drug in general's concentration that will inhibit the growth of a bacteria. So it'll keep it from growing, not kill it, but keep it from growing. So we used 4 strains of bacteria in 2 different types, gram-positive and gram-negative. The main difference between them is that gram-negative are a little bit harder to penetrate. They have like an additional wall around them. So you can think of it as like an extra line of defense, which is difficult to deal with. But in our middle column and rightmost column, we have our manganese nitroxylene complex versus the nitroxylene ligand on its own in microgram per milliliter, which is kind of hard to compare. So we converted it to micromolar and really able to see initially that our complex does outperform nitroxylene on its own, which is showing that it is boosting the already known activity of nitroxylene, which is exciting. Additionally, I really wanted to highlight the 210 micromolar versus 64 for the PA. I mean, this seems high, but PA is hard to deal with, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, as it is gram-negative bacteria. But as I mentioned, these are just preliminary results. Like we aren't literally getting the best data here. So what we wanted to do next is something called a CFU. CFU is colony forming units, and this is a 4-day test where we will eventually count the literal amount of colonies that formed on an agar plate after spreading and treating them with these concentrations. So based off the bars, you can see we had a control 2.5, 5, 10, 20, and 40 concentration of microgram per milliliter of the bacteria treated with our drug. And what we're able to see, and notably this is in the log, so the control is at about 9 log, whereas once we get to 20 microgram per milliliter, we have about a 3 log difference. And this is important because this is what we call the MBC. So the MBC is the minimum bactericidal concentration. So if you look at like Purell or like any other antibacterial agent, the 99.9%, this is where that comes from. So this is showing that we're able to kill and inhibit that much bacterial growth. So we're able to literally count less and less colonies on a plate compared to control through 10 microgram concentration there. And especially, what's especially important to note is at 40, we're able to get a 5 log reduction, which is just really cool. Really able to see that our complex is doing its job even in a higher concentration. We also repeated this for DRPA, which is drug resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which actually acted in a lower concentration of about 10 microgram per milliliter. But then 20 and 40 even less and less, which is what you want to see. Like as we increase the concentration, less and less colonies form, which is exciting. It's showing that our complex is potentially working as we want it to. We repeated this for SA, which is Staphylococcus aureus, a gram-positive bacteria, and we're able to see even less concentrations work, like starting to work better in less concentrations at 5 microgram per milliliter, which is around a 2 to 3 log reduction, and we're able to see that our complex is slightly outperforming the nitroxyline alone, as the dark is our complex versus the lighter color is the nitroxyline. So this is really cool, really starting to show us results, get us definitive results that, hey, like, we're doing good, our complex is actually working relatively well. This is what we like to see, but how necessarily is it working? Is it just because we have 3 molecules of nitroxyline, or is the manganese playing a role in this? So we wanted to figure that out, and to do that we had to do a test called ROS. Now ROS is reactive oxygen species, and we use MRSA, which is methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So basically what this test is doing, it's looking at the fluorescence of the metal ion, the manganese. So obviously we would hope that the nitroxyline, would not have any of it, and it did show that. Whereas as we increase the concentration, we want to see more and more fluorescence, showing that our manganese is active and playing a role. And we're actually able to see that according to this graph in the darker color. And so initially, what does that mean? It's like, okay, cool, our manganese is in there. Well, we think that it could be potentially binding to the DNA of the bacteria, which would cause it to cleave. And if the bacteria's DNA cleaves, then it cannot reproduce, it cannot continue to grow or spread, which would show that the manganese is actually acting like a dual mechanism with the nitroxyline itself. Additionally, it's kind of like a Fenton-like reaction, the manganese is, like we believe it could be, and producing free radicals, which can cause damage and cause a lot of oxidative harm within the bacterial cell. This is something that we want to continue to look into to find definitive evidence for, but this is what we think could be happening here based off what the Fenton reaction is. And so by looking at this, we're seeing like, okay, we're able to kill bacteria. We're able to see that our manganese is playing a part. We have a dual mechanism here. What about normal cells? Are normal cells going to be affected or not? And so we looked at the cell viability with our complex and just normal cells, non-bacterial cells, normal just skin, or excuse me, not skin cells, but healthy normal cells. And we're able to see actually that in lower concentrations we increase the viability of the cells, which is cool because manganese is a bioessential metal, so your body actually needs it. So in lower amounts of this drug, we're actually increasing the viability of the normal cells. But as you increase the concentration, it does go back down, but it's not to a point where we should be concerned about the viability, because too much of a good thing is typically a bad thing in just about every part of life. But these preliminary results are pretty promising. We still need to reproduce them 2 to 3 more times, but so far it's exciting. And now that we know our cell is working, or not our cell, our complex is working against bacteria, it's safe for our cells, it has dual mechanism, we want to see like how could it be used more in a clinically relevant situation. So that's what we did, some checkerboard assays. So this may be very overwhelming at first, but if we focus here, these wells alone contain only ciprofloxacin. Ciprofloxacin is a antibacterial agent, especially active against gram-positive bacteria, which is why we're using MRSA. And the red circle here is showing the MIC of the ciprofloxacin. And so the very bottom well is the control that has no drug whatsoever in it. But as you go up, you increase the concentration of the ciprofloxacin. And similarly, down in the bottom, we have just our complex. And again, in the leftmost is just a control, no drug. But then the red circle down there is our MIC for our complex. And every other well that is within those dotted red lines, like in the top of the picture, has half manganese nitroxylene and half of the ciprofloxacin. So we want to see in a 1-to-1 ratio if they are able to work well together. And this is what we call the FIC index, which is the fractionary inhibitory concentration. So we're able to see, like, does our drug work well with the ciprofloxacin or does it not? And actually, a 0.5 index is showing a synergistic effect, meaning that they harmonize together and actually work better together than they would on their own, which is pretty exciting. We were able to reproduce this experiment, but this time with ofloxacin, another type of antibacterial medicine that is used clinically today, and our complex in the same fashion, same setup. But this time we got a little bit higher of an FIC index of 0.75, which instead of being synergistic is additive, which doesn't mean it's bad that they don't work well together, but there's really just not a whole, they're not boosting one another, so to say. They're just like kind of helping each other, really just doing a little bit better together. And so I just summarized this in this table here, the indexes and like some of the math. So on their own, the ciprofloxacin only has a MIC of 40, but with the manganese nitroxylene it's 10. The R complex on its own is 20, but with the ciprofloxacin it's 5. That's what ended up giving our 0.5 index. And then if we look at B, the ofloxacin had 20, but with our complex it was 10. Our complex on its own was 20, with the ofloxacin was 5 for a 0.75 index, kind of showing how they're working well together. And so after this, we wanted to look at to see if our complex could withstand bacteria trying to grow a resistance to it, because this is, again, another more clinically relevant study. If somebody checks into the ER, checks in to the hospital in general with an infection, you don't want to just keep pumping them full of the same antibiotic and it not work. And that would be a case of, if we look at this green here, the ciprofloxacin. So we use Staphylococcus aureus, gram-positive bacteria here. At about day 10, there's already a 16-fold change in the MIC, the minimum inhibitory concentration. And by day 30, or really day 20, we have a 128-fold difference, or fold change, excuse me. This is showing that bacteria are able to grow a huge resistance to the ciprofloxacin, and by then, if you're still needing treated, it's not going to do anything to that bacteria. That bacteria is going to continue to grow and make the patient worse. Whereas our complex, if you look at the zoomed in portion of the graph here, it is actually able to only have a full change of 2, and the nitroxylene itself is able to have a full change of 4. So our complex is actually outperforming not only the ciprofloxacin greatly, but also the nitroxylene by a 2-fold difference, which is exciting, showing that our bacteria is not able to grow resistance to our drug, and our drug is able to stay stable and continue to fight back that bacteria. So we repeated this in PA, which is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a gram-negative bacteria, and we use meropenem because that is a known antibiotic used against gram-negative bacteria. And we didn't get as well of results, but we still got exciting results showing that our complex, again, and the nitroxylene both outperform the meropenem because they only had a 2-fold change, whereas meropenem had a 128-fold change. And additionally, our complex did not have a 2-fold change until about day 17, whereas nitroxylene at about day 4 or 5 had a 2-fold change, showing that, again, our complex is just a little bit more stable than the nitroxylene when it comes to the gram-negative bacteria. So we've showed how our complex is working. It doesn't allow a resistance to grow. It has a dual mechanism, is reducing the amount of colonies, just able to inhibit all the bacteria. But a big challenge in bacterial studies is how it handles biofilm. So biofilm is a kind of like a net, you could think of it like. So when the bacteria cells die, they create this net called biofilm over all the healthy bacterial cells. And so this net is what makes treating the bacterial infection, or just trying to inhibit the bacteria, so hard, because it can be pretty hard to penetrate. So the biofilm inhibition studies are looking at to see if we could stop that biofilm from even growing. Because if we could stop it from growing in, say, like an early stage, like if we catch an infection in an early stage, like say a clinical study, then if we can stop it from growing, we can then treat it with multiple drugs and eradicate that bacterial infection. Interestingly, if we look at 10 microgram per milliliter, we get a 1 log difference again. But then by 20, we have an even larger 3 log difference, or 99.9% per se. And by 40, we actually have a 5 log difference, which is showing that this complex is able to help keep that biofilm from forming, which would help treat a patient in the future potentially. So all these studies really have just shown that our complex is doing its job. It's able to fight the bacteria in a healthy way. But looking for the future and like what we could potentially do, we would want to maybe mess around with the ligand to see if we could swap out the nitro group for, say, chlorine, bromine, or iodine, messing with the lipophilicity, because you don't want too little lipophilicity, but you don't want too much. It's kind of like a sweet spot. Like most things in life, there's a sweet spot, and we just really need to look for that sweet spot to see if we could, even bring our MIC values down more, use less of a concentration of our drug, because the less of a drug that you have to use, typically the better, especially when dealing with cytotoxicity. Or we could look at a bis complex of 5,7 dinitro, or even the tris version of that, to look at how does that affect the cells? Is that able to kill the cells better or worse, or what can we do with it? So we want to continue to look at this. We think manganese would continue to be the right choice for this, due to its oxidative state and how it, as I mentioned, the potential fenton-like properties of it as it would enter the bacterial cell. And I know that there's going to be questions, and I would love to answer any questions that you guys may have. You can email me or text my phone. Just text me your name and like your question, and I'll see if I can step away for a moment to answer you, to do what I can, or I could set up a meeting with you guys, my mentor and my PI. Just really whatever you guys want. I'd love to talk about it with you, and I'm just grateful to have a great summer. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate it. Have a good one.